If you grew up anywhere near a hobby shop in the 50s, 60s, or even 70s, you remember that smell. Balsa dust, dope glue, and something faintly metallic. And somewhere in that shop, usually behind the counter because it was technically an explosive, sat a tiny silver cylinder about the size of your thumb. It was called the Jetex 50. And for about 3 decades, it was the closest thing a kid could legally buy to owning his own miniature rocket engine. Today it's gone, vanished from hobby shop shelves, forgotten by everyone except a small, fiercely devoted community of collectors. So what happened to the Jetex 50? Let's find out. The birth of Jetex. The story starts in England, right after World War II. A company called Wilmot Mansour & Company was operating out of a decommissioned RAF hangar in Southampton. Literally a leftover wartime airfield building. When they developed something genuinely clever, a miniature, solid fuel rocket motor, small and safe enough to power a model airplane. They showed it to the modeling press in early 1948, and by June of that year, it was on the cover of Aero Modeler magazine. The first motors were called the Jetex 100 and 200, with a bigger, more powerful 350 following that November. But the motor that made Jetex a household name in hobby circles came in May 1949, the Jetex 50. It launched alongside kits for a model plane and a model car. Wilmot Mansour wasn't just selling an engine, they were selling an entire way to play. For thousands of enthusiasts, that was the real appeal. You didn't have to design a rocket engine yourself or experiment with dangerous homemade fuels. Everything was neatly packaged, carefully engineered, and ready to introduce ordinary people to the excitement of rocket-powered flight. What had once seemed like something reserved for military research or science fiction was suddenly available on the shelves of local hobby shops. The concept quickly stood out because it combined simplicity with genuine innovation. Instead of relying on spinning propellers or rubber band power, these tiny motors produced real jet-like thrust, giving lightweight models a smooth, quiet climb through the air. Watching a Jetex-powered aircraft glide across the sky after its brief burst of thrust felt surprisingly realistic, making the experience unlike anything most hobbyists had seen before. As word spread through magazines and flying clubs, more model builders wanted to try the new technology for themselves. Demonstrations attracted curious crowds, and hobby publications regularly featured new designs created specifically for Jetex power. Before long, the tiny rocket motor had become one of the most talked about innovations in post-war aero modeling, inspiring countless builders to experiment with new aircraft and vehicle designs. How it actually worked. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting from an engineering standpoint. The Jetex 50 wasn't gunpowder, and it wasn't like anything you'd find in a firework. Inside that little metal tube was a solid pellet made mostly of guanidine nitrate. When ignited, it didn't explode. It burned steadily, releasing a huge volume of gas through the nozzle while leaving almost no ash or residue behind. You'd load 1 or 2 pellets into the motor, thread a combustible wick through the exhaust nozzle until it touched the fuel, light the wick with a match, and step back. The thrust was gentle by rocket standards. We're talking fractions of an ounce, but sustained, which made it perfect for lightweight balsa gliders that needed a steady push rather than a violent kick. And critically, the exhaust wasn't dangerously hot. That's the detail that let this thing sit on hobby shop shelves next to model glue and balsa sheets instead of being locked in a back room. That careful balance between performance and safety was one of Jetex's greatest achievements. It gave hobbyists the excitement of genuine rocket propulsion without requiring complicated equipment or specialized training. The motors were simple to prepare, easy to transport, and reliable enough that beginners could quickly understand how they worked after only a few launches. Because the fuel burned in a controlled, consistent way, model designers could predict how their aircraft would perform and build around that steady thrust profile. This encouraged experimentation with new wing shapes, lightweight fuselages, and glider designs that took full advantage of the motor's unique characteristics. Instead of chasing raw speed, many builders focused on smooth, graceful flights that showcased the technology at its best. For many enthusiasts, firing up a Jetex motor became part of the experience itself. Lighting the wick, waiting for the motor to come alive, and watching a model accelerate under real rocket power created a sense of anticipation that ordinary rubber-powered models simply couldn't match. It was a remarkably sophisticated little engine for its size, and one that left a lasting impression on an entire generation of model builders. The Golden Age. Once the Jetex 50 caught on, it created an entire ecosystem. Model kit makers like Keelcraft and Skylita started designing planes specifically built around Jetex power. Real, semi-scale kits, shaped like actual jets, and rocket planes of the era, like the Gloucester Javelin, the Hawker Hunter, and the DH-110C Vixen. It wasn't just planes either. Jetex power showed up in model boats, and this is the part that always gets people, model cars. Kids were racing little Jetex-powered jet cars down driveways and sidewalks, powered by the same rocket motor that flew their airplanes. For a certain generation of dads and granddads, the Jetex 50 wasn't a toy. It was their first real hands-on experience with propulsion, combustion, and honestly, consequences. You had exactly 1 or 2 pellets, you had to load it right, thread the wick right, and light it right, or nothing happened. It taught patience in a way that batteries never will. That learning experience became part of the hobby's appeal. Every successful launch felt earned, and every mistake taught builders something new about preparation, timing, and design. For many enthusiasts, those small rocket-powered models sparked a fascination with engineering that stayed with them long after their childhood flying days were over. Peak Jetex and the Variants. By the 60s, Jetex had refined the formula into several variants. The 50B, the 50C, the 50 Export, even a high-thrust 50 HT with a hollow core fuel grain designed to burn faster and hotter for a bigger kick at the end of the run. All these 50 series motors put out roughly the same modest thrust, around ½ an ounce, spiking close to 7/8 of an ounce near the end of the burn. But the Variants let serious hobbyists fine-tune performance for different models. This is the kind of nerdy customization that turned casual buyers into lifelong collectors. As the product line expanded, experienced builders began experimenting with different airframes, flight profiles, and launch techniques to get the most out of each motor. That flexibility helped keep the Jetex system relevant for years, giving enthusiasts plenty of reasons to keep building, testing, and refining their models long after their first successful launch. The decline. So if it was this beloved, why did it disappear? A few things happened at once. First, radio control. As RC technology got cheaper and more reliable through the 60s and into the 70s, hobbyists wanted planes they could steer and fly repeatedly, not single-burn rocket gliders that flew straight until the fuel ran out. Jetex was thrilling, but it was fundamentally limited. One flight, one burn, done. Second, safety and liability. A solid fuel rocket pellet marketed to children, sold over the counter at hobby shops, was always going to become a harder sell as safety regulations tightened through the later 20th century. Even though Jetex was engineered to be about as safe as this kind of propulsion gets, kid-safe rocket fuel is a tough sentence to keep selling forever. And third, simple economics. Manufacturing shifted, hobby shops themselves started closing as big box stores, and later, the internet changed how people bought toys and hobby supplies. Wilmot Mansour eventually stopped production, and the guanidine nitrate pellets that powered every Jetex motor became harder and harder to find. By the time most of us were kids, Jetex 50 was already a memory for our parents. Something you might find at a garage sale in an old cigar box, nozzle still faintly stained from its last burn. Where it is now. Here's the good news. Jetex never fully died. There's a small, incredibly dedicated collector community keeping the history alive. Full archive sites documenting every motor variant, every kit, every original set of operating instructions. Original Jetex 50 motors, especially unused ones still in their boxes, now sell to collectors for real money. And in a nice full circle moment, a modern successor called the Rapier range is being produced in the Czech Republic today, using the same basic principle in a cardboard, single-use format. The idea Wilmot Mansour had in a leftover RAF hangar in 1947, a genuinely safe, genuinely simple rocket motor a kid could operate, is still flying today, just under a different name. That kind of legacy is remarkably rare in the hobby world. While the original Jetex brand has long since faded into history, the technology and enthusiasm it inspired continue to live on through collectors, modern enthusiasts, and new generations of model builders who appreciate the elegance of its original design. It's a reminder that truly innovative ideas don't always disappear. They often evolve, finding new life decades after they were first introduced. The Jetex 50 is a perfect example of something this channel keeps coming back to. The stuff that felt completely normal to one generation and completely unimaginable to the next. Somewhere, there's a kid right now who's never held a solid fuel rocket motor bought over the counter at a toy store, and honestly, that's probably for the best from a liability standpoint. But it doesn't make it any less cool that it existed. If you had one of these, or a dad or granddad who did, I want to hear about it in the comments. Did it work? Did you lose a plane to the woods? Let me know. Subscribe for more deep dives into the stuff that disappeared without anyone noticing, and I'll see you in the next one.